Good to see so many people in. Okay, good. Great to see so many people in the room, and thank you, Brian, very much for the invitation. It's fun to go last because I was sort of doing pump fists and saying yes, yes, yes to everything my predecessors were talking about. So some of this will be, a lot of it will be a repeat. I don't know if it's because I'm a Californian or what, but I like to do a little bit more conceptual and visual and more content-free presentations. So I will switch over to my slideshow, and the real content you've already heard. So let's consider this an entertainment, and I hope it's at least a little entertaining. So let me see here if I can make this work. Can you all see the slide there?
No.
No. Okay.
Did you share screen?
Share. Okay, now you can see it, right?
No.
Still no? Okay. Man, I hate technology. Now?
Unless they're black slides.
No. Now? No. Okay. I'm gonna wait for some shrieks of pleasure when it actually gets shared. I think I have this PDF thing on full screen. Maybe I'm not allowed to do that. Okay.
Hey.
That's what I'm looking for. Okay, excellent. So this is me. My part of the show will focus on 4 questions, and we've heard something about each of those questions already. So I hope you feel free to nod off since I can't see you at the moment. The first question I'm going to talk about whether DH is new in the library. We already know that it's not new. I'll do a little bit of a backward history of my own experience in my library at Stanford and beyond. So one thing that I'd like to talk to you about is this great interactive scholarly work called Orbis. I hope you have seen that. I can send Brian the URL later to share with you if you'd like. This is a geospatial network model of the Roman world. It was released in 2012 and had a major update just about a month ago. Co-created by a faculty member and by our library digital humanities specialist, Elijah Meeks, who I think visited KU a couple of months ago. And it's hosted on library hardware. So you wouldn't know from looking at it that it's a library site, but it really is in many deep and important ways a library site. There's another project that I've been helping with a lot. This is PhD research on the history of and the evolution of Portuguese language in Brazil. It relies on massive numbers of digitized library books, about 16,000 at the moment. Lots of library time, lots of library hardware, and library workflows. Many of these books came from Stanford's participation in the Google Books project. Many of them came from HathiTrust, which Harriet talked about. But most importantly, all of the books came from the library. That means that the work that's gone into this particular digital humanities project has been going on since our library has been collecting books in Portuguese, which is well over 100 years. These 2 projects depend on the library in immediate ways and in deeply historical ways. Let's go a little bit further back to something that I hope many of you have heard of. That's the Stanford Literary Lab, which in the past few years has become sort of a touchstone of digital humanities in the big wide world. When people write in the popular press about DH, they sometimes write about the Literary Lab and about Franco Marini, who was a sort of celebrity English professor even before he started doing this, and has become so even more. This Literary Lab pamphlet, which was published in the beginning of 2011, called Quantitative Formalism. It's the first of several publications. They have about 5 or 6 now. This is the direct result of a seminar that was led by one of my library colleagues, Matt Jockers, who's now a professor at University of Nebraska. Matt organized a seminar that was held in the library building called Digital Libraries and I don't remember the name of it, Beyond Search, something about digital libraries. So it was what you can do with digital library stuff beyond just searching through it. That really library-centric seminar moved over to the English department where Matt's library role had him housed, and it eventually became the Literary Lab. So even though this particular Literary Lab publication looks like it came out of the English department and out of a lab, if you look at the catalog record, you can see that it's based simply on 250 novels from the 19th century collection of Chadwick Healy. Chadwick Healy spelled incorrectly there. Some of you may know it has a Y instead of an I, Chadwick. But this data that the Literary Lab used to do their research was actually acquired by the Stanford Libraries in 1997. So it's in internet years, it's super old, right? It's an old collection. Franco Marini first published his sort of dreams about digital humanities, which he was calling distant reading of the great unread. That's all the stuff that we don't read anymore, that we've forgotten, usually for good reason. He published this, but in order to fulfill his vision to actually do that work, he depended heavily on the library and on the data that the library's been collecting. And I wanted to note that you in Kansas also have this collection. So you, if you can find your Franco Marini and he can find you, he or she, then you can also do the same sort of work. It's not the work itself is new. Some of the methods are new, but the collections that it depends on are not new. This is a non-Stanford project. It's popularly known as Culturomics. I hope some of you have heard of this publication in Science magazine, late 2010, by a small team, actually a very large team at Harvard. There were two primary authors, Jean-Baptiste Michel and Erez Lieberman-Aden. Their work depended on the Google Books project with its Ngram viewer. I hope you've all used this. This is one of my favorite slides. It doesn't work anymore because they fixed it. I don't know if you can see, but this is a search, a comparative search of the usage of two words, one sublime, one fublime with an F. You know what's happening there? So Google, after a couple of years, they fixed that problem. So I can't have this cool, can't have this fun slide anymore. One reason that I like to show this Google error is because Google's my next door neighbor, so they're the giant in the room. It's fun to poke at it a little bit. I think that it was library and scholarly expertise that helped them fix this problem. They didn't know about this problem, or at least they didn't think it was important enough to pay attention to for many years until it had been released. So the Culturomics people at Harvard helped Google create this interface, and they wrote a really outstanding paper, and the lab continues its work, I believe, using library books, using massive amounts of library books and library cooperation and collaboration. Not only from our library, far from only our library, from many libraries across America and in the UK, and now it's expanded to our Spanish partners and partners from all over the world. The point is, Culturomics and Big Data DH, the Ngram Viewer and Google Book Search, they depend on lots of libraries and on the work that those libraries have been doing since, let's say, 1700 or let's say 1500, I don't know when. It's been going on for a very, very long time. So my message here is that DH depends on the library. It always is dependent on the library, and it always will depend on the library, even without us doing anything extra, let's say. But I'd like to take us a little bit further back in DH history writ large, and to address the question, is DH even new on its own terms? In order to do that, I'd like to introduce you to two of the great DH pioneers, if you haven't heard of them, or remind you who they are if you haven't heard of them. One of them is Roberto Busa, and the other one is Dbar Bush. I like that their names are so congruent in that way. Roberto Busa, whom I'll introduce you in more detail in just a minute, I see him as the founder of sort of traditional humanistic Digital Humanities, used to be called Humanities Computing, some people still call it that. These are traditional humanities texts studied with with the help of digital media, digital methods, digital tools. Dbar Bush, he's the head of, or the founder of what I call sort of the spiritual founder. I can't claim that he was active in the field, but sort of the thought founder of Type 2 digital humanities, which is taking digital objects, either video games or programs or whatever born digital media we might have, and studying them as if they were traditional humanistic texts. These are both very important strains in modern DH. So let's go in more depth into Busan. Here he is pictured in the 1960s with his revolutionary tool of choice, the IBM mainframe. He used it to assemble what at that time was a revolutionary complete concordance of the works of St. Thomas Aquinas. He began working on this in 1946. He had been collecting instances of every single word used in Thomas Aquinas' work on note cards. He has a funny introduction to, or a funny description of his project, which you can easily find, where he says, you know, I got up to about 10,000 handwritten note cards and I decided there must be a better way. He had heard of IBM and he had the chutzpah to contact Thomas Watson, the head of IBM, and they hit it off and they became research collaborators. But what was the result of that collaboration? Oh, before I move on, I wanted to point out one of my favorite puns in all of the digital humanities literature is this one from Father Busa, Digitus Dei est hic. So, the finger of God is here. Whether or not you're a believer, I think you can believe that he was talking about digitus in a very digital humanities way. So what was the result of this 30-year project? Well, it was a print edition. And here he is presenting it to Pope Paul in 1974 when it was first published. Take a look at those volumes, look at their binding, and see whether you believe that this is the same set of books that's on a shelf outside my office at Stanford. And you can look at it even closer and you can see the same sort of half-calf binding. But my argument is that even now you can check out a piece of DH history from the library, right? That's where you want to go if you want to see what this great work is like. It's not very readable, it's a concordance. It's a lot of volumes and each volume is really heavy. But you can check it out from your library as well. This is honest to goodness, honest to God, honest to Thomas Aquinas, digital humanities work. It's real and it's important. Here's Father Busa in his later years. He died a couple of years ago with something that's probably more recognizable as a digital humanities project. And it has another, I'm mainly showing it because I like his title, his Latin title, Tomai Aquinatis Opera Omnia cum Hypertextibus. He seems to have had a really great sense of humor. So let's move on to the Type 2, to the other pioneer of DH. Dbar Bush was the head of the U.S. Office of Scientific Research and Development during World War II. This is the government office that ran the Manhattan Project. So many people would think of him as a sinister figure, but certainly a leading public intellectual at the time. Near the end of World War II, and in fact, just a month before his horrid creation, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Dbar Bush was thinking about the future of information and artificial intelligence, information storage, information overload, a term that he uses. So here he is claiming that we have so much information and we're still using the same, we're wading through it in the same way that we did in the days of square-rigged ships. So I think that's meant to be a little slam on libraries, but you know, he's not quite right. His article called As We May Think, first published in The Atlantic in 1945, republished immediately in Life magazine, so it's really a popular article, As We May Think. He's the top scientist, and this is his vision for how we handle information overload. I like this drawing of the guy with a little camera on his head. That camera is meant to follow the research path of this scholar and to record every research move that he makes. And the information retrieval system that he uses is really a glorified microfilm reader. Mm-hmm. Those really are microfilm reels in the middle. They're stored in the drawers of the desk and they're retrieved automatically, and and they're projected on little screens on this desk. This is the way, this is his dream machine. So this MEMX is meant to be an artificial memory, an artificial cultural memory, and a miniaturization of all of the world's information. So, I mean, it's sort of easy to ridicule, for me anyway, to ridicule Dbar Bush and to honor Roberto Busa for their vision. I mean, here's what microfiche and microfilm readers really look like. I don't know whether your library still has those machines kicking around, but mine did until a few years ago. My assertion, maybe you'll laugh at it, microfilm is the future, really? A 56-volume print work of big fat volumes, is that really digital humanities, seriously? But both of them are important and honored veterans of the profession, and I do think it's important to acknowledge the continuing role that they have and the importance of the library in that work. So, who does and who supports DH? I hope I've convinced you that they're a natural fit, but it's still always a question whose job it is to do DH on campus, whose job it is to support DH. Brian has asked us all to give you a little bit of an on-the-ground perspective of digital humanities librarianship. I know you're not all digital humanities librarians, and that's totally okay. I wouldn't want everyone to be a digital humanities librarian, because then who would do all the other important work, like metadata and collecting, doing collection development and acquisitions and circulation. So I've basically held my same position at the Stanford libraries for about 17 years now, and counting, I hope. I've had different job titles, but my work has been sort of the same. It's been electronic resources, particularly in the humanities. I've had the role of digital guy in the collection development units for a long time. Now, of course, many more people are much more comfortable with digital resources, so I'm not the only one anymore. But I do spend my time mainly doing DH and mainly supporting DH. I'd like to tell you a couple of quick anecdotes to illustrate the response to what seems like this, an unexpected response to what seems like this central question. So about 12 years ago, a certain digital humanities librarian, let's call him Librarian W, was discussing with an art history professor the possibilities of a particular database platform for this professor's collection. The discussion ended as follows. You don't need to tell me about the scholarly possibilities of your database. No offense, but I'm the scholar here. You're just the plumber. Boo, hiss, right, I was hoping you'd say that. To tell the truth, Librarian W did not take offense at this, not really. Professor X was clear that he meant this with all due respect. Anyway, when he said, when he needs a plumber, he really needs a plumber. Plus, Professor X is now emeritus and no longer haunting our hallowed halls. Librarian W is still very happily employed with a memorable anecdote to share. So, over the years, I thought about this plumber thing, and obviously it stuck with me, and I think it's a good anecdote on the sort of misunderstandings between faculty and librarians, not only in digital humanities, but all over, throughout the library profession. As a service profession, we are often relegated to a somewhat subservient position. But I've also had a slight change of heart about how bad it is to be the librarian. And I've thought about various librarian stereotypes and even various plumber stereotypes. I don't know how many of you have seen the great film Brazil by Terry Gilliam. It's one of my favorites. I hope you go watch it or rewatch it if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it, you know that the film really is about library work. It starts out with a metadata transmission error. Here you see the name of Archibald Tuttle, thanks to a fly who is swatted and spilled on the teletype. Tuttle is changed to Buttle, and the wrong person is rounded up by the evil bureaucracy and sent to his death. But have no fear, the person who rescues this is the plumber, played by Robert De Niro, as you see. My point here is that there are regular old plumbers who just come to fix the sink. They're important. Then there are plumbers who are heroes, hackers, renegades, with a deep knowledge of the system, with the tools and with the willingness to go out on the limb for people in need. That's the kind of plumber I think we DH librarians should be proud to be, and all librarians as well, but DH in particular requires sort of a knowledge of the system and the guts behind what happens in the library. So I'm going to give you the assertion that supporting DH really is doing DH. So it's not quite the right question to set it up as who's doing the work and who's supporting that work. for reasons that are really inherent in the practice of digital humanities. Its deeply collaborative nature, its interdisciplinarity, its deep requirement that the people doing the work are familiar with the tools and the methods and the materials and the theory. This is what I propose, that anytime we support DH work, we're doing DH work. In much the same way that anytime we do library work, we are enabling the work of scholars. So how do we think about and actually do DH in the library on the ground? Well, I have a couple of anecdotes, not anecdotes, they're examples. I won't go into them at length because all three of my fellow speakers have said the same thing. I think that we should always insist on license terms that allow for a local copy of the data we purchase, both for archival and research purposes. This is data, and we pay a lot of money to these vendors. We should really, really have the data in hand, and we should be able to use it. We should have full rights to use it. We should act as really bold intermediaries between our researchers and our data providers and our library administration as well. I know not all libraries administrators are equally bold in allowing this sort of use, but really it's our right. It's the return on the investment. If any of you are in the payments division or in electronic resources, you know how much we pay for these things. They're immensely expensive. If all we're doing is paying for the privilege to use the vendor's website, that's just a waste. It's a waste, and it's not right. Vendors, in my experience, are getting increasingly used to my asking for data and my exercising my right to let researchers use that data in bold and creative ways. So I think the landscape is changing, but for many years it was kind of a hard sell. Selling the vendors on the idea that we should have this data, that we're not going to sell it on Pirate Bay, or we're not going to start streaming it for free, and we're not going to destroy their market. Those were always ridiculous fears anyway, but ridiculous fears need to be combated with solid reasoning. Finally, I think that we should embrace fair use and understand it in the ways that the profession has always encouraged us to. There's a lot of fair use that can go into digital humanities work. There have been a couple of recent court victories in the Google Books litigation. I encourage you to look into those if you haven't been following those court cases. The judge's decisions in practically all of the recent victories have relied heavily on library and digital humanities input written by our very own colleagues. Our Nebraska friend Matt Jockers was one of the principal authors of a major brief that was quoted at length in all three of the recent decisions in favor of HathiTrust and Google Books. So I'd like to end with a couple of tweetables. I didn't see anyone tweeting there, but you're welcome to do it. Welcome to spread the word. I think that, as everyone has said so far today, DH and the library are really natural allies. They really have been. DH is not a passing fad. I think one of the dangers, and here I disagree a little bit with Thea, I don't believe that DH is going to fade into the woodwork. It might, who knows. But I definitely agree that it's not a passing fad. It's something that is solid research direction. I think that traditional scholarship, non-digital scholarship, will also continue. That's why, for myself anyway, I insist on the distinction. But I do think it's important to understand that this is, if not the wave of the future, it is a wave of the future. And given its long past and its long future, this is what libraries are all about, right? Preserving the past for the future. And then the things that I just said. Support DH by doing DH, and do DH by supporting DH. Own your data, exercise your rights, and enable your scholars to exercise their rights. So for my last sort of, I'd be tempted to call this pop culture, but I take children's literature too seriously to call it pop culture. I'll give you one more literary reference. You may remember in Roald Dahl's great novel, Matilda, that Matilda's first sort of foray into the magical world of knowledge and her great gifts came when the public librarian, Mrs. Phelps, introduced her to the radical idea that she didn't have to do all of her reading in the library. She could take those books home. She unbelievingly said, "Could I do that, even little me?" And Mrs. Phelps said, "Yes, of course you can. You can take even more than one if you want." This is exactly what we should be saying to our faculty members. We have data. We've been purchasing it for your use. You should use it and let us know what kind of use you want to make with it. We'll do everything in our power to get it to you and to enable you to use it. So that's all I have to say. I'll switch over to my face now, for better or worse. Let's see whether this works. Stop sharing. Okay, am I back with you?
Yes.
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks, everybody. They were great presentations. We are right at 3 o'clock. So if people have any quick questions, we can take them now. Or we can, talk about it here later on. No, these folks had to go with it and stick around for a couple minutes. Any questions for the speakers? Glenn, I just have one question, actually. I kind of referred to it earlier, for anybody, but for you, actually. And I know you're a big proponent of a big tent, digital humanities, and very inclusive, which I think makes a lot of sense for libraries. But I'm also wondering if there's a point where it's maybe not too big, but if that inclusivity is counterproductive at some point. I'm just thinking, because I'm in a lot of conversations about digital humanities where I get the feeling that people are talking about very different things.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great question. I think that there's the truth that if it's everything, then it's nothing. There's also the truth that, and I don't mind admitting this in any crowd, much less a library crowd, but there's an awful lot of digital humanities work that doesn't really speak to me deeply. But I don't see the harm in inviting scholars who want to identify, scholars or librarians or whoever wants to do DH. I don't see the harm with identifying their work as digital humanities if that's what they want it to be. I do have limits, and I've had people who, for example, want to join our campus DH email list because they do, I can't remember the term for it, it's sort of digital enhancements of the body modifications and implants and cyborg kind of stuff. That doesn't do anything for me at all. I didn't prevent them from joining the list, but I did forward their announcement to their conference, and I told them that I kind of thought that's not what we were about. But aside from those limits, I don't see the harm in letting people in. If the community gets big enough, and it's showing signs of getting big enough that our one big conference is too big, then perhaps we could split into a type 1 and type 2 digital humanities, sort of the new media studies versus the humanities computing. I shouldn't say versus, because I really think no matter what, there's a lot of crossover. There are lots of well-known scholars. Matt Kirschenbaum is the one who first comes to mind, who do both kinds and do them both very well. But I don't see any danger in it being watered down or turning into nothing.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of things like MOOCs or just using a digital tool and whether that becomes digital. or these regular sort of articles in kind of the mainstream press that sort of have a narrow conception of what digital humanities is, and then criticize it for being too narrow. Because it doesn't know what it means.
That's a really good point, and I think that speaks in favor of the Big Tent idea. First of all, I do think it's important for those of us engaged in DH to say MOOCs are the furthest thing from our minds, and it's also okay to say that DH is a very, very big field, and if you take one particular book or one sentence from that book and turn it into a scare piece, I presume that's what you were talking about. There's been sort of fear-mongering in the New York Times and the Atlantic Monthly and New Republic about how DH is going to close down our English departments and burn our books, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay to say, look, digital humanities is a lot bigger than that, and that doesn't represent even close to the majority. I wouldn't want to banish those people from our community, but I would want to prevent outsiders from claiming that is our community, from defining us through that narrow view. So in that I agree with you.
Anything else, anyone? What question?
One of the points that Dia made was student projects, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'll give you good examples of
We broke a Mecca one time. I broke it. We taught a Mecca class as friends.
Was the question for me?
Yeah. I'm thinking of like the intro to grad studies class where they all have to do some sort of DH project.
Yeah, so the question was about student projects and if I had any experience. Well, Tammy and I and Wade last year worked with a professor in religious studies and Stephanie to build a kind of class-based project around Omeka. And I know from Harriet's presentations, he has a lot of examples of that too. That was successful in some ways and not successful in others. I mean, there was this issue of how much time divert from the rest of the class into learning Omeka and the technical issues. And there was issues about just different expectations from the professor and what we wanted to get out of that. But on the other hand, we all learned quite a bit with that.
I did break a Mecca. We did Fran's class too, right? So that's the grad class, which is the intro to grad studies.
Right.
That was very successful. And we have other things on the horizon with philosophy and stuff like that. So we continue to learn.
There's a lot here just bubbling up at AKU. We're working in the classroom with digital. Okay, well, thank you all. Let's give them one more.